Hi everyone, my name is Sammy Napierala. My first name is Samantha, so on the peer reviews it'll be Samantha N. But I am going into my second year of being a paraprofessional at the elementary level. Specifically, I work with kindergarten. I work with the same kindergarten class all year. And I do have my undergraduate degree in teaching from the University of Georgia, but I went straight into my master's after my undergrad and decided to get this job as a parapro to kind of get my foot in the door in education. And it really has worked out to be a great role for me as I take a bit more of an observing role in the classroom. I'm still active in the students' learning, but I'm able to kind of step back and sort of see what's going on in the classroom. So, in this presentation, I'm going to be talking about the course objectives that I most connected with over this course and the ones that I really thought that I was able to complete. And talk about some future plans that I have and how I'm going to implement those plans with networking and collaboration. So, the first course objective that I really thought this is the one that I really connected with after reading through all of them was one about it says to evaluate personal beliefs and professional experience related to multicultural gifted education issues. And so through the readings and activities for this class, I think I really got to see my first year through a different lens. I kind of was able to go back and look at all of the things that happened and think about, well, what do I really think about this? Like, why was I acting this way? Or why were these people perhaps acting this way? A lot of those issues for me came up in conversations with coworkers or maybe just conversations I overheard that had to do with multicultural students or students who weren't from the majority, because at my school, the school is very largely comprised of white students. And so I really enjoyed specifically Singleton and Hayes's Courageous Conversations, and I found them to be super real and applicable, especially the idea of how necessary these conversations are, but just them acknowledging the fact that it is going to be uncomfortable and it is going to be hard, but it's work that needs to be done. This is where I really find my personal work, because I think there's a super big disconnect at my school personally between what we preach necessarily, which is, I really feel like the administration is kind of like, oh, everyone has equal opportunities. Everyone is able to get where they need to be at our school. And I've just heard different beliefs from the staff. So everyone's just not really on board with that idea. But anyway, going back to the courageous conversations, I know that these conversations are going to be uncomfortable and sometimes unwelcome just because of how ingrained and how firm these beliefs are. But getting coworkers and educators to really think about why they think these things and how that affects their teaching, that's really the ultimate goal. How does what you think about certain students affect how well you are able to teach them? That's something that I've really, I think, come away from with this class. And something else with this objective also has to do with one of the chapters was from Howard called Decoding the Dominance Paradigm. And so Howard discussed three main contributing factors, talking about, why people in power, especially in education, why they are able to keep that power. And it talks about the assumption of rightness, the luxury of ignorance, and the legacy of privilege. And so I was even just reading through that article and using it in the discussion posts and even in my second position paper. Just those in power in my community where I work and everything, they do assume that they're right, and they are able to be ignorant to the issues faced by multicultural students because they belong to the majority. And there's also that legacy of privilege. They're just given things that some of our students are not, and they take that for granted. And so using kind of the courageous conversations in that dominance paradigm, I kind of was able to understand how these mindsets have been able to go on for so long, and use that just knowing that I'm able to it's okay for me to say something about it because it's really not okay and it negatively affects our students. So the The next objective that I wanted to address that I think that I've really been able to assess this semester is the one that talks about examining gifted program policies and procedures through multicultural frameworks. And before I get into that, but I just found this comic that I thought was really funny, talking about this student wanting to do something else or wanting to learn, and then the person in the boat is just saying, no, you need to finish the test. We need to see if you've learned anything. And the boat is sinking as she's saying all of these things. So I just thought that was kind of a funny, like an anecdote, I guess, for how gifted testing works also, because I've really just found how biased testing can really be, even though Georgia and obviously my school district uses multiple criteria. This past spring, I was able to help with gifted testing at my school because my administration knew I was going through this program. And it really gave me, because I had learned about all the multiple criteria. So at first I was kind of thinking like, oh, wow, this is going to be super equitable. Teachers are going to be having portfolios ready. They're going to be recommending kids left and right. And really, that just wasn't the case at my school. It was a lot of it. Most kids were either identified based on a universal screener, or there were very little teacher recommendations. So because of that, I really enjoyed reading Fraser's review of the assessment issues in gifted education and their implications for identifying gifted minority students, because it goes over 3 factors that really contribute to underrepresentation in gifted programs, which are test bias, selective referrals, and reliance on deficit-based paradigms. So for me, the test bias, I think, is super obvious. We use a achievement test that it's the MAP test, if you're familiar with that, but I think it can be very biased, and there's lots of language in it that is not equitable, and English language learners can really have a disadvantage with. And there's also referrals. And even though at my school we do use the universal screener, there are like the motivation portion of the multiple criteria typically is by like a rating scale. So there can be a lot of subjectivity and bias with that, especially because a lot of teachers at my school don't understand or aren't aware of the different ways in which giftedness can manifest itself, especially in multicultural populations. And so Fraser goes on to say that fixing these problems comes down to gaining a broader perspective of what giftedness is and how these assessments can be made more equitable. So for future plans, my big idea for this was kind of to try to shy away, and instead of shying away from problematic conversations, I want to engage in these courageous conversations to help others examine their personal bias in the way that I have. And that's kind of where I found my personal work throughout this course, was kind of encouraging my coworkers and kind of giving them that nudge and engaging in those conversations, encouraging them to wonder about why do you think this? Or why do you think, only white kids are getting recommended for the gifted? Why is that? I think this is especially important relating to gifted education because teachers at my school don't realize how subjective the process really is. And something that goes along with that is just expecting those conversations to be uncomfortable and unwelcome at times. Because it's not going to be easy. I mean, I'm from a place where things have been the same for a long time, and people don't like change because it goes back to what Howard was saying about the dominance paradigm, because it puts people out of power and they're going to do what they can do to stay in power. So I think courageous conversations are a really good first step for that. Obviously, it doesn't happen overnight, but anyway, another area for growth, I think, for myself is to actively question the gifted identification process at my school, and then to help others see what giftedness can mean for all students. Because now that I sort of know how it goes at school, next year, I really think it could be possible for me to sort of question the AP and question the coordinator about, well, why don't we use this? Or do teachers know that they can use this? Just starting those questions, it's kind of similar to the courageous conversations in that way. Just starting those conversations and asking those questions can help get the ball rolling. Okay, so for networking and collaboration, These are related to my future plans, but so for next year, I want to speak with the teacher I'm working with about how to make our classroom more equitable and then engage in those courageous conversations with her. So, the way that it works at my school is that every kindergarten classroom has a full-time paraprofessional. So, next year, I'll be working with actually a different teacher than this past year. So, I'll have the opportunity to develop a new relationship. And I think that gives me a really good kind of foot in the door with going right off the bat. Well, how can we develop this environment? How can I have a role in this? And how can I even get this person to help examine her own personal bias in how she teaches in her classroom? And then this I kind of touched on a minute ago, but I also really want to speak with those in charge at my school of the gifted identification process and like how much control do we have over that at our school, or is that at the district level? And what of multiple criteria like do we actually use? Because I'm not so convinced that we actually the portfolio. I really would be interested to know how many teachers at our school are aware of the gifted identification process and everything that really goes into it. So I think a lot of that has to do with me just starting to ask those types of questions. And here's just a quote that I thought was really important that I came across in the textbook from Ford we had for this semester. And it says, education in a democracy must respect the uniqueness of all individuals, the broad range of cultural diversity present in our society, and the similarities and differences in learning characteristics that can be found in any group of students. So taking that and applying it to gifted education, just really thinking about teacher education and, lots of teachers don't have their gifted certification, which is fine. But I do think that teachers who are recommending students for giftedness or the gifted program need to first of all, examine their own bias when they're doing that and when they're just teaching their students. But yeah, that's all I have. Thank y'all for a great summer. I've really enjoyed this course. It helped me kind of piece together some things from earlier in this degree from the endorsement classes and kind of bring a lot of things together and gave me some really practical ways to apply what I've learned into my own future classroom and into my job for next year. So thank y'all.